Hi, it's Tripp Harrison, Twiford Funeral Home in Manteo, North Carolina, and Elizabeth City, North Carolina. Back with you today with another video in our series, When Someone Dies. This is where we take a look at the logistics that are presented at the time of the death of a loved one. Obviously, it's a difficult time for most people, and it's a time where people are more susceptible to forget things and need details spelled out for them. So we try to address one of these issues on every one of our videos in this series. So I encourage you to like and subscribe to this channel and keep up with it, because we all will have to deal with a death at some point in our life if you haven't already done that. And it's important to know what information you need to have and what things you need to obtain. So today we're going to talk about one of the elements of the paper chase in the funeral world. There are, just like any other part of life, there's a lot of paperwork, and death and dying is no exception to that. I want to caution you in the beginning that laws and procedures for paperwork regarding the death of an individual vary greatly from state to state. Today we're going to deal with just one form, which is probably the centerpiece of the paperwork involving a death, which is the death certificate. For information's sake, the death certificate is a legal certified form that is approved or endorsed by the state or Commonwealth and is a legal proof of the death of an individual and the time, date, location of death, and the cause of the death. So those are very important things for a number of logistical hoops that will have to be jumped through. So the death certificate is an important, critical item to be sure that you understand. Basically, what the death certificate, at least in North Carolina, as of this time, this is 2022, the death certificates look like this. And what you see here is basically a form that is filled out for you by the funeral director or funeral home, and it has the typical information, vital statistics we call them, things like name, age, gender, place of birth, date, time, and place of death, spouse's name, the occupation of the deceased, the name of the person first reporting the death, the cause of death, the veteran status of the individual, and what the final disposition, and that's a term you'll hear a lot in the funeral world, is a type of disposition, final disposition. That basically means what's going to happen to the remains when all the services and things are over with. Will this be a burial or a cremation or an anatomical donation or what have you? In North Carolina, they even ask a couple of other questions that are newer to the death certificate. One of those questions is, did tobacco play a role in the cause of death? And the completer, the medical completer of this form will make that call as to how much of a role tobacco played, obviously for statistical purposes for the state. They also ask in North Carolina whether the individual was pregnant, because that obviously has a lot of other implications as well. So all this information the funeral home will gather from the family at the arrangement conference. And the arrangement conference is basically after the individual that's passed away has been physically removed from the place of death, usually within a day or so, sometimes a few days, the family will get together at the funeral home around a conference table, just like, in fact, I'm sitting in an arrangement office right now. And they'll go through the first thing that they'll go through is all those vital statistics. And usually between the members of the immediate family, that information is pretty easy to gather. Now, once the information is gathered and the top part of the death certificate is filled out, the medical end of the certificate, which is the bottom portion, which explains the cause of death, will need to be filled out and signed by a medical authority. Typically, this is the individual's physician, their personal physician, who has records of their health and knows if they've been ill or what have you. They'll leave it with the doctor for them to sign after they've filled in the specifics regarding the cause of death and time and place of death and that sort of thing. So if the deceased was under hospice care, there are physicians that are in charge of these hospices. They're called medical directors, and if the deceased was under the care of a hospice, inpatient or outpatient, that medical director will typically be the one who will fill out the bottom of the death certificate. If there is no personal physician that's determinable and the patient was not being treated by a doctor, the county's medical examiner, in the case of North Carolina, will be contacted. The medical examiner, who is typically a trained medical professional, they will be contacted, and the medical examiner will come out to the funeral home after the removal of the deceased has happened. They'll take a good look at the body and see if there's any determining factors about what they see that could contribute to the cause of death. And they will also typically withdraw blood and fluids to be sent to toxicology just to make determinations that are too small for the naked eye. So once the ME has come out, the medical examiner, they may decide that the individual does not have a clear and determinable cause of death, or there may be some suspect part of the passing that needs to be examined further. In that case, the medical examiner will refer the case and the deceased's body to the pathology physician who is located, typically they're in larger hospitals. And the body will be taken there, and the medical examiner will give the information they've collected to that pathologist, who will do an autopsy on the individual to make a determination as to what the cause of death was. Once the death certificate is signed and delivered to state authorities, that death certificate becomes certified. It's important to know that the law states that a completed certified death certificate is required in the case of cremation, when that's part of the plans. No matter how long it takes to get that investigation over in that example, the cremation cannot happen until that death certificate is completed. So how many copies of certificates do you need? Well, it just depends. Death certificates, certified copies are not free. So people are asked, how many death certificates do you think you'll need? Well, typically, we tell people that, the process is, you think through, we have a life insurance policy, they'll require one. Pension funds that will become available to the survivors, they'll require one. You may need one to submit with vehicle and real estate title changes. It's very common that family members, close family members at least, like to have a copy of that final death certificate just for their records. So how long does this take? A certified death certificate can be obtained different amounts of time, basically, depending on a number of factors. If the deceased's primary care physician is away on vacation or out of town or what have you, that can cause a delay. In group practices, physicians will usually sign for one another because they can pull up the records of the patient and make a reasonable determination. In the case of hospice and palliative care, the medical directors of the nursing homes and hospice groups are usually very available to sign that death certificate pretty quickly. ME cases, that can take a little longer because there's a lot fewer medical examiners than there are doctors, so that can add a few days. If the case is referred for an autopsy, that can take quite some time. And as a matter of fact, the medical examiner would be involved, and then the autopsy would happen, and that's another thing to consider. Officially, in North Carolina, there's a 5-day mandated death certificate completion policy, but that's often not the case if there are complications or the death happens over a holiday period, anything like that. So that's what the death certificate is all about. I encourage you, if you've lost someone and you're looking to this for guidance, that you have one that you can find fairly easily that's not buried in a family album or anything like that, but at least for the first couple of years, because you might be surprised the number of places that require that certified copy for you to be able to conduct business on behalf of that loved one who's passed away. So that's all I've got for you on the death certificate. I'm Tripp Harrison, Twiford Funeral Homes, Manio, North Carolina, and Elizabeth City, North Carolina. It was great being with you. Please like and subscribe to this video. It really helps us get more views and more exposure. And we'll see you next time.